So I welcome you all to today's side event, which is in collaboration with the Nigerian Conservation Foundation and Calvary University. Did I get it right? Okay, that's good. So I welcome you all to this event this evening. We will be screening a documentary, and also we'll be having a panel discussion, and we hope to have more participants join us as time goes by. So let me quickly introduce the documentary to us. We will start with the documentary before the panel discussion. The documentary, which is called Without Leaving Anyone Behind, is a feature-length documentary that explores the greatest question for our time. We all have these questions coming up about the climate crisis, transition to low-carbon future, without leaving anyone behind. How can we have everyone on deck to be able to address these issues? And as we go through COP27, humanity is at an energy crossroads, and what do we do next, which is a question we keep asking. This will have profound impact on the next generations. I hope we will enjoy this documentary, and afterwards we will have the panel discussion. Thank you.
This is a private conference happening in a very expensive hotel. A lot of people don't know this is happening, and this is going to affect millions of people's lives and the future of our race, of our humanity.
I'm Harrie Vredenburg. I'm a professor at the Chapagain School of Business at the University of Calgary. I'm also a research fellow at the School of Public Policy at the University of Calgary, and I'm an international research fellow at Oxford University. I was born in the Netherlands, in the eastern part of the Netherlands, in a region called Twente. And I was born in an industrial town called Hengelo, to which my parents had moved after World War II. When I look at my three grandsons and my one granddaughter, I first of all worry about climate change. Are they going to be living in a world where we have huge climate events? At the same time, I worry about, are they going to be able to make a living? You can't leave it alone. You gotta figure it out. That's what you like about it. It just scratch my brain. For the past 30 years, I have traveled around the world talking to industry and government leaders and experts on energy transition. I've done research and published more than 60 papers on energy, sustainability, and energy transition in leading global scientific journals. I have served on government expert panels and on energy company boards of directors as founder and academic director of both my university's Global Energy EMBA program and its Master of Science degree in Sustainable Energy Development. I have taught students from around the world who are today leading their countries in energy, economy, and climate. The key question that has motivated me for the past 30 years is there a way for our society to transition to a low-carbon future without leaving anyone behind? What is the answer to this most important question of our time? Climate change. I have people come to me who have a science background. They're geologists in an oil city like we have here, a lot of geologists, and they say, you know, Harry, don't worry about climate change. Climate has always been changing, it always will. You know, this is all a lot of fuss about nothing. But I have the feeling that you don't believe that.
And so you say the climate has always been changing, and of course that's true to some extent. What matters is the amount of change and the pace of change that's being caused by the human activity that's beyond the ability of the world to adapt.
So fundamentally our climate problem is caused not by today's emissions. It's caused by the total quantity of CO2 that we've put in the atmosphere. We started putting CO2 in the atmosphere when we started to use fossil fuels back in the 18th century. We continue to do it each and every day. Imagine if I stood on the corner of the street and every hour that goes by, I threw 4 million cars up into the sky continuously, like this. I'm a strong guy. I throw 4 million cars up into the air. I would get stopped in no time. People would say, my God, what are you doing? Well, that's how much CO2 we put up every single hour.
As the Earth warms, the polar ice caps are melting and raising sea levels and water temperature. This leads to more flooding and more extreme weather patterns. Sea level rise is especially a problem in low-lying countries, and particularly low-lying islands in the developing countries of the global south. The Maldives in the Indian Ocean and the island country of Kiribati in the South Pacific are notable examples of small island countries whose very existence may be threatened by climate change. The Caribbean islands are also experiencing the effects of rising sea levels and more extreme weather.
The truth is, we are an island state, a twin island state. We have seen in the CARICOM region the real effects of global warming. In the past few years, we've seen an unprecedented amount of flooding, of hurricanes.
My name is Dave B. Sutton. I live at the ICRC as well as CJS. This is presently here. My age is 56 years. But when I was like 6 years old, I used to live down on this end here, an estate they call the ICRC, Constance Estate. And the house that I grew up in from 1 to 6 years old is right now in the sea, approximately 500 feet into the sea.
These climate change impacts vary in how they can be coped with, depending on wealth. Low-lying developed countries, like my native Netherlands, have the infrastructure and response protocols for dealing with rising sea levels. Countries in the global south often do not.
What happens is that it happens so fast that it can happen in a matter of days. It could be on dry land today, and in about 2 weeks' time, it's in the sea. That's right? Yeah. Fast. The road's very fast. This house was, who house it was? One? Budo, that was Budo house right there. Yeah.
this is a private conference happening in a very expensive hotel. A lot of people don't know this is happening, and this is going to affect millions of people's lives and the future of our race, of our humanity.
And these people are just concerned about the short-term profits, and the short-term profits that they make is at the expense of the longer-term survival and the longer-term viability of many other people across the world. We're talking millions of people.
If we're going to have any hope of the future, please give it up for Todd Smith.
Extinction! Extinction! What do we want? What do we want? When do we want it? You know, when I used to fly...
Todd Smith is a leading spokesperson for Extinction Rebellion, the activist organization that has been highly visible at United Nations climate meetings and that has at times immobilized the City of London. We reached out to him for a conversation.
Todd Smith, I guess I grew up in very much a working class family just outside of London, and my dad was a builder and he told me to always do a job that I'd enjoy. And I set my heart on becoming a pilot at the age of 5 years old and overcome many adversities off the back of a 2008 recession. 7 years later, I landed my first job in the airlines and, you know, was living the dream.
I suffer from eco-anxiety, which is perpetuated by understanding the mainstream science, but seeing the lack of leadership in our government and our corporations going in the opposite direction.
This is not new. We have been betrayed by our governments of the world for decades, and you know, that's why ordinary people have to take to the streets now, and why I've had to give up this high-flying career, and I'm still in £95,000 worth of flight training debt. But what does it all matter unless we have life support systems to continue?
Spending time with Todd Smith had me reflecting back to my Greenpeace days. I asked myself, what is the role of these protests in the energy climate conversation? Do they have an impact?
Well, activist organisations, we see them on the TV all the time, and sometimes when we're commuting around the city, they disrupt our daily work, and we might get a little bit frustrated about it. But I think they play a really important role. It comes down to this point. We need, the world has been quite slow to get to grips with this, and it needs a poked with a stick from time to time. So I think there is a role for these. And you know, I think it's going to help form society's opinion a little bit, push the world on a little bit.
Harry, welcome to London. Very nice to meet you.
Thank you. Good
to
finally meet in person.
Yeah.
If climate activists are a force pushing along the energy transition, what other forces are there? Here I am with Krum Surov, a Cambridge University-trained economist with Candriam, a financial investment firm. Countries go to them when they need to borrow money.
So if countries don't want to play by the rules, if they want to be the free rider where somebody else is going to solve this problem, very soon they might find out that when they need to borrow, there aren't very many takers for this type of borrowing.
Pension funds are a major source of investment capital, and they are increasingly looking for climate impact in addition to necessary returns on investment.
We're seeing that the new generations coming from below, you know, like nowadays the 50-year-olds, the 40-year-olds, and especially younger people, they are realizing that, okay, well, return is important, but it's actually important that when they retire, there's going to be a place for them to retire, right? I mean, like, environment is important, and if the environment is destroyed, regardless of how much money you're going to have, your retirement is not going to be viable one way or another.
Ogiame Atuatsi III is the ancestral king of Wari, a traditional West African kingdom in an oil-rich region in the Niger Delta area of Nigeria that is home to the Itsekiri people.
Interests, capitalism, modernization, they are powerful interests, very powerful. How do you slow them down? I think what you're likely to do is to reassess them and say, look, we can still make money. We can still come up with inventions that make life easier, but we can also do it without causing so much harm to our environment.
Because investors are looking for more than just financial returns, what does this mean in the renewables and energy transition space?
There is literally boatloads of capital coming in this energy transition. I mean, this is coming from an oil and gas guy that has spent, plus 40 years chasing energy that the world needs. But I've come to recognize that the world needs to change, and we need to get away from all this carbon. And there is economically viable alternatives to carbon. It's definitely a transition, and it's going to take some time.
The world is transitioning to a low-carbon energy future. But before we explore what that will look like, let's understand the existing energy system.
So it's hard to actually fathom the size of Earth's infrastructure for energy today. The amount of effort and pipelines and systems and refineries and logistics and supply chains is just truly amazing.
The world uses right now about 100 million barrels of oil a day. That's every single day.
Energy is a critical component of a country's economic development. Since the Industrial Revolution in Europe and North America, which was powered by fossil fuels, human beings have entered into unprecedented levels of comfort.
Today we live longer, safer, healthier, more secure lives than at any other time in history. And we actually do have, fossil fuel infrastructure to thank for that. Access to energy is profoundly important for our quality of life.
Intergovernmental panel on climate change acknowledges we're still going to use a lot of oil and gas right through to 2050.
Oil and gas are also more than just fuel for our cars. Plastics, polyester and nylon, resins and detergents are all produced from petrochemicals. These products are major components of vehicles, buildings, electronics, and healthcare products. Did you know that almost 50% of a Tesla car's volume is plastic made from petrochemicals?
The reason that oil has such a stronghold, such a significant place in the global energy mix is because it's a very versatile energy source. It can be used for many, many things, products that we see all around us, aviation fuel, car fuel. And in addition to that, it packs a big energy punch. When you compare it to other sources of energy, you can get a lot of energy out of a barrel of oil.
The energy transition is not just about finding replacements for oil and gas. It is also about countries, regions, and people whose livelihoods depend on this infrastructure.
What has the energy industry afforded me? It's made me enjoy my life, really. I mean, I've kind of centered my career, all around oil and gas. and it's taken me to places, and I've seen and experienced a lot of things in the world, right? And I hope to experience many more things thanks to it, right?
The Republic of Trinidad and Tobago is a country the World Trade Organization now classifies as a high-income developing country, thanks to oil and gas, which accounts for about 80% of the country's exports.
That's how our country makes quite a lot of revenue, right? That's how we get foreign exchange. And you see the impact it has had on the landscape. It's basically created towns, created businesses, and sustained the country for 100 years.
After earning a master's degree in petroleum engineering at the University of Trinidad and Tobago, Christopher George, a general manager operations for Touchstone Exploration, is the first person in his family to purchase a home.
Without the industry, would I still have this home? Probably not. I probably would have still been searching. The energy sector has afforded me this opportunity.
Because Paula said she had us to give all about it, was it timing?
Of course, my family, they are very proud of me knowing that I'm working in the oil industry. It's a big thing to be working in the oil industry in Trinidad and Tobago, you know, because that is one of our core business that we have in Trinidad and Tobago. So anytime you hear someone is working in the oil industry, they think that, you know, you're making a lot of money and you have the best of lives. And for the most part, that is the case. So it was really something that my parents have been and continue to be very proud of. Yeah.
Hi, good morning. My name is Kellyanne Langdon Pascal. Welcome to the Rio Claro Learning and Development Center for Special Children. I'm going to take you on a little tour.
The energy industry in Trinidad and Tobago provides more than just jobs.
This kind of assistance that you would be getting from these energy companies, you know, they really they boost the work that the special needs children or any other center, you know, that works with children. That kind of thing boosts the work that is done.
As the world is transitioning, many oil-producing regions are struggling with what it means for their local communities.
The oil industry, it's been a tough industry, but it's almost like a necessity. And so Thunderchild is an oil-producing First Nations. So we have oil, but what do we do with it? What do we do with it? Do we leave it in the ground or do we extract it?
The oil consumption isn't caused by oil companies, although they certainly play a part. It is caused by the need for the energy. And up until very recently, there wasn't any alternative.
I think any version of the world where we're seriously decarbonizing, we're of course crushing the existing oil businesses. And I think that's what needs to happen.
Is the world ready to shut down the oil and gas industry?
There's some environmentalists on the extreme left who call for the complete shutdown of the oil and gas sector. In my view, that can't happen.
I agree with them that there is a crisis and we badly need action. But I don't think the right action is to stop everything, because the impacts of that on many, many people is going to be really significant.
So what do we do? Is it even possible to shut down the oil industry?
That conversation is being carried by the younger generation and some others, that there's just a switch you could flick. That switch doesn't exist.
It has been sold as in very simplistic, get off of oil and the world is going to have addressed climate change. And this is a very complex challenge.
COVID shut down a huge amount of the world's activities, and yet still was a dent, a tiny dent, in the overall use of oil and gas.
So what about the people who work in the oil and gas industry and the infrastructure? Do they have a role to play in the energy transition?
When you think about the energy transition, a lot of times the focus is on stranded assets, but there's also a huge component of stranded people.
For us just to sort of dismiss entirely multi-trillions of dollars worth of infrastructure, hundreds of thousands of workers across the world, tremendous amounts of engineering expertise, and assume that there's nothing value to contribute to a net zero future is preposterous and divisive.
Many people believe that we need to close down the global oil and gas industry as fast as possible and transition to a new energy system consisting of renewables, energy storage, and electric vehicles. Is that possible today?
This false narrative that we have to flip our entire energy system to something brand new that's completely ill-conceived is going to have economic effects and effects to people's quality of life that will force people to fight back against the energy transition.
Despite massive increases in renewables, renewables globally still make a small portion.
The rest of the world isn't quite ready to drive a Tesla right now. We would love to, but while the average Canadian, the average American citizen, or anybody in North America, Europe, they are ready to drive a Tesla because they are charging points. The rest of the world, electricity is still a thing.
It is not possible to have a conversation about global energy transition without a global south or developing world perspective. Africa, for example, is a continent that is expected to see its population grow at 3 times the global average and is also set to outperform the rest of the world in economic growth over the next several years. Ken Mugambi, my friend and former student, is Deputy CEO of Trinity Energy Limited, a Pan-African integrated energy company headquartered in Juba, South Sudan. We spoke to him at Trinity's offices in Nairobi, Kenya.
Before we can start talking about all these other good to have things, it's basic needs first. And I believe it's called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's very clear. Food, housing, shelter.
So when you go to a developing country and you ask the questions about climate change, you get answers that are, well, yeah, it's an issue, but it's not our number one problem.
In the Caribbean, we have pressing social issues that people need to deal with, and a lot of times in energy and the environment is seen a little bit as a luxury, to be able to think about those. People say, I need to put food on my table tomorrow, again, because a lot of these countries are poor and we can't think ahead. Renewable energy is about my children, my grandchildren, but people are saying, how can I think about that today when I've got to feed tomorrow my family?
In the global south, the conversation around energy looks completely different.
The reality is that standard of livings, health, bringing more and more people into the developed world, improving access to water, and all these important things that are beyond just the climate crisis. Energy plays a really important part in all of that.
Energy frees people from poverty.
Where people are starving, where people are struggling to make ends meet, and there's a resource that is available to them that can help to address the fundamental needs that they are facing on a daily basis. And then for someone who has very little understanding of the struggles of everyday living in Africa, to come in and then say that no, Africa is not justified to develop this resource. I think it's really, really unfair.
I think fossil fuels will continue to play a role, certainly also in some of the parts of the world where, frankly, they have just as much of a right to use their fossil fuels as we have just as much of a right to demand of our own governments that we move beyond them.
If we're going to transition to a low-carbon future without leaving behind countries, regions, communities, and existing infrastructure, technology and policy will be key. The government of fossil fuel-rich Alberta, like Hawaii's, made a policy decision that would impact private industry. It announced the phasing out of high-emissions coal-fired electricity. What was the impact on the renewables business here?
People think of fossil fuels, coal, natural gas, are really the cheap way to produce electricity. And solar and wind are not so cheap as what many people think. I mean, that's subsidies and regulatory, so it doesn't make economic sense in a pure market sense, but you're suggesting it does.
Correct, and I'm close to it. We're working on these projects all the time. We have been for, in my case, the better part of 20 years. And there was a time when solar and wind were more expensive electricity than a lot of fossil fuels. But what's happened in the last 10 years or less is the price of electricity coming off solar panels has dropped by easily 90%. Wind in the same time frame has dropped around 70%. So, in a very short period of time, solar and wind moved from a more expensive source of electricity to cheaper than the next best on a cost basis, which is probably combined cycle gas-fired power.
Solar energy makes a lot of sense in sunny southern Alberta, but in other regions, other technologies may be more suitable. If some fossil fuels will still be needed through 2050, as predicted, we are going to need to develop them without carbon emissions. One of the technologies being deployed in global north oil-producing countries is carbon capture and storage.
Well, first of all, what's carbon capture and storage for? Well, it's to capture the carbon that's emitted from typically big industrial processes like power plants, oil refineries, steel works, cement works. They require a huge amount of energy to go in, so it's probable that we'll always have some fossil fuels, or for the foreseeable future we'll have fossil fuels, but it could work if you can capture that carbon. There's a number of ways of doing it, but if you're able to capture that carbon, you then need to store it. You don't want it to go in the atmosphere. And so regions that are really well suited have the geological sinks to put it into, and typically they are oil and gas reservoirs that are depleted.
Personal electric cars are growing in popularity in much of the world. But what about the long-distance trucking industry?
The heavy freight sector is one of the really difficult to decarbonize sectors in Canada, around the world. You can't really, for many of the trips that these kind of trucks make, the possibility of making it pure battery electric where you plug it in to recharge just doesn't make sense. The vehicles are too heavy. The distances they travel are too long. Many of these trucks are doing 700,000 kilometers a day, virtually every day, and they don't have enough time to even recharge, if they even had enough space in the truck to hold the batteries. So what we need to do is to find a zero-emission solution for these kinds of vehicles, really looking at the different options. And the one that is the most attractive for this sector is hydrogen.
I've followed nuclear energy most of my life. I was co-author of the Alberta Nuclear Power Expert Panel report in 2009. Is nuclear power part of a decarbonized future?
So there's a really important role for nuclear energy to complement wind and solar in the electricity mix. But as I said, only 20% of our energy consumption today is in the electricity sector, and we need to decarbonize our whole energy system. So there's a really interesting opportunity to apply nuclear technology to those otherwise really tough to decarbonize parts of the economy, like industry, like heavy transport, shipping and aviation, but also heat that's used for domestic heating, but also in industrial uses as well.
The single most important thing to know about climate science is that climate change is roughly proportional to the historical cumulative emissions of CO2. It's a very profound statement. What that means is that if you stop emitting CO2, the climate doesn't get better, it just stops getting worse. It also means that effectively the benefits of cutting emissions, most of those benefits fall to the distant future, not immediately.
A radical new technology that is making waves is direct air capture, or DAC. It captures the existing CO2 in the atmosphere.
So what happens? The fan draws air through this fill, and we drip a chemical the other way, perpendicular to it. When we do that, the air and the chemical react and we capture the CO2 from the air. First thing to understand, CO2 in the atmosphere, it's 400 parts per million. That's actually not a lot. It creates a huge climate problem. To give you a sense, it's one drop of ink in an Olympic-sized swimming pool.
One drop of ink in an Olympic-sized swimming pool.
So
That's all?
That's all. So trying to pull it out is hard. But it's been done, and the idea of taking CO2 out of the air is also not new. So if you've been on a submarine, or if you've been on the International Space Station, you'll know that you can scrub CO2 out of the air. That's how they renew the air in those small environments.
In answer to your first question, which is, shouldn't we be focused on cutting emissions? The answer is absolutely yes. But cutting emissions can never reduce the problem. So there are reasons that we, in the long run, I believe, want to do carbon removal. And to me, direct air capture is one of the techniques of carbon removal, and the technology my company is developing is one of the possible competitive techniques inside there.
But it's been done, and the idea of taking CO2 out of the air is also not new. So if you've been on a submarine, or if you've been on the International Space Station, you'll know that you can scrub CO2 out of the air. That's how they renew the air in those small environments.
Let me answer your first question, which is, shouldn't we be focused on cutting emissions? The answer is absolutely yes. But cutting emissions can never reduce the problem. So there are reasons that we, in the long run, do, I believe, want to do carbon removal. And to me, direct air capture is one of the techniques of carbon removal, and the company, the technology my company is developing is one of the possible competitive techniques inside there.
Mangrove ecosystems store more carbon dioxide than any other terrestrial forest in the world, making them the #1 climate combat against global warming and climate change. So if you want to save the world, let's start in our backyard by preserving the swamp and the mangrove ecosystem.
Lest has dedicated his life to protecting this beautiful UNESCO Caroni mangrove in Trinidad and Tobago. It's meeting people like him that gives me hope for the future. Are you optimistic about the future?
The things, though, that really need to fall in place is people need to have empathy. It's going to sound like a little odd, right? Why empathy? What I mean by that is we need to understand how people are going to be affected by climate change, but then also we need to understand how people are affected as we make this transition in how we produce energy, where we produce it, and then, of course, you know, how people will be able to make use of these new alternatives.
I'm optimistic that climate change won't be some existential threat. I'm optimistic that we'll deal with climate change through a combination of emissions cuts and our removal of solar geo, whatever, in a way that doesn't have huge human impacts. Yes, I'm optimistic about that.
Are you optimistic that we'll get there?
Sorry, no. We have the tools, we have the technologies, we can do it if we wish, if we choose. But I'm not optimistic that the political will is moving fast enough. I'm not optimistic that you, me, and everybody else on the street is creating enough concern at government to make that change.
It is incumbent on all of us who are fortunate, privileged, and honored enough to be elected or to be leaders of our countries, and in particular as global world leaders, to take decisions today and to ensure that those decisions are implemented in the shortest possible time frame.
It's important for the Western world to appreciate the context within which Africa is coming from in pursuing development of its resources.
I really get a sense that things are being renegotiated, things are being realigned, whether or not we recognize it. And there is a hand that really guides the affairs of men, whatever you want to call it, providence, destiny, and, you know, God Almighty, whatever you want to call it. And it has a vested interest in humanity getting it right.
Climate change is the single most important issue facing the planet. Not addressing it will leave a huge burden for future generations. The effects will be felt most profoundly by those living in the global south. How we address climate change depends on where we live and on the natural resources there. There is no single solution to climate change. Climate technologies will likely come from the global north and be transferred to the global south. As the Cambridge University scholar Charles Hampden Turner has said, true innovation is reconciling the horns of a dilemma. Our existential dilemma is addressing the climate crisis without leaving anyone behind. What we need is leadership that is able to rise to the challenge. We need leaders who have empathy for different perspectives. Yes, I am optimistic that we can address the climate crisis without leaving anyone behind.
So usually when you watch a movie, you expect to have something to snack on. But with this kind of documentary, I bet you will lose appetite for anything. And this is actually beyond a documentary, because leaving no one behind actually, critically looked at issues that are affecting us, especially in the global south, and it brought together voices. You could see experts, speak about the climate crisis, the energy transition, and all sorts. And then you could see activists raising their voices. And I have never met the producer, but then I saw myself in the documentary. And so it just shows that collectively, everybody must come together to address this crisis that we are faced with. And so let's give a round of applause again for this. So this side event is brought together by the University of Calgary, Simba Creative, the Nigerian Conservation Foundation, and Chapagain School of Business. Also, the event is hybrid. It's happening both virtual and physical. We have some watching using the UNFCCC app, and also some watching connected via YouTube. So we'll go straight to the panel discussion. We have one of our panelists joining us virtual and in person of Harrie Vredenburg. I hope I got the pronunciation correctly. He is a scholar of innovation, sustainability, and economics in the global energy industry, and holds a position of faculty professor of strategy and sustainability at the University of Calgary. Calgary's Chapagain School of Business. He also holds appointments as a research fellow at the University School of Public Policy, and as international research fellow at the Oxford University SET Business School in the UK. He previously taught at McGill University in Montreal. He has also authored and co-authored more than 50 papers on energy policy, energy, tech innovation, strategic management journal, organization science, and quite a lot, including M&T, Slong Management Review. And also, he also has some affiliation with the Harvard Business Review as well, the International Journal of Economics and Business Research, and a whole lot. He also co-authored government reports on innovation and on nuclear energy. And it might interest us to know that according to Google Scholar, his publications have been cited in literatures of more than 9,000 times. So in 2023, he was awarded with the Queen Elizabeth II Platinum Jubilee Medal. So with filmmaker Sylvanus Ndumbi, he produced a documentary without leaving anyone behind. Humanity at an Energy Crossroad being screened worldwide in the late 2023. He was born in the Netherlands, and he holds both Netherlands and Canadian nationality. So a round of applause for Dr.Harrie, who is joining us virtually. We also have with us, it is actually a privilege for me to introduce Sylvester Ndumbi, who is the producer of this great documentary we have just watched right now. And he is an award-winning filmmaker with over 10 years of industry experience producing documentaries, short films, and TV shows. He was selected as one of only 15 filmmakers to participate in the Alberta Accelerator Producers Program, where he was mentored by executives from Warner Brothers and Entertainment One. And in 2020, Sylvester was selected by Netflix for its Diversity of Voices program at the Banff World Media Festival. His passion to tell stories that help people connect to each other on a deeper and more meaningful level. I mean, that's one of his passions. So I'm really very privileged to have met Mr. Sylvester and also to introduce him today to the panel. Thank you. We have with us Dr. Joseph Daniel Onoja, who is the DG of the Nigerian Conservation Foundation. He is a renowned conservation biologist and the premier conservation, NCF is known to be a premier conservation NGO in Nigeria that has lasted for the last 40 years. He is a member of the National Council of the Climate Change in Nigeria, and also a board member of the National Park Service. He has led the delivery of transformational leadership, nature-based solution project in Nigeria and across African continent. A round of applause for Dr. Onoja. We also have with us James Wheeler, who holds a BSc in biology from the University of Zimbabwe in Harare and an MSc in climate change and development from the University of Cape Town. He joined the World Wide Fund for Nature South Africa in 2012, where he currently holds the position of a senior climate specialist. He's worked on climate change issues around mitigation, adaptation, and impacts for more than 18 years, focusing on building resilience and trying to shift society to low-carbon future. He has worked within the private sector and also the public sector, including developing adaptation funds for several UN agencies. And over 10 years that he has been with WWF, he has played the role of assessing carbon markets, engaging with national and international policy, and has engaged with many partners, organizations to provide technical input into climate change issues. He has also provided guidance to WWF South African energy engagements, as well as work on biofuels and also bioeconomy. So let's welcome Mr. James Wheeler. And today, this panel discussion will be moderated by Mr. Adebayo Memudu, who is the Acting Director of Technical Programs for the Nigerian Conservation Foundation. Mr. Memudu has over 15 years of experience in providing leadership in delivering forest and wildlife conservation projects across Nigeria. It's my honor to have you, sir. So let me hand over the mic to him. Okay.
Good evening, everyone. It's our pleasure to gather here tonight to look at the crisis confronting humanity and to see how we can amplify our voices to address the crisis threatening the planet Earth. We have been able to assemble highly resourceful specialists in the field of natural resource management and sustainable development issues across the global south. I have the real privilege and honor to, as they have all been introduced, to present the panelists to you who are believed will do the thorough justice to the issues at hand. We want to see how we collectively address the crisis of climate change facing humanity without leaving anyone behind. How can this be made possible? How do we address the issues without leaving anyone behind? I will start with Sylvester to my far left. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks everyone for coming. So I just want to mention that this is an abbreviated version of the film. So the actual film is about 80 minutes where we go deep into some of the themes that you saw here, like the Global South or the technologies. And for me, being someone that traveled, we traveled to, I think, 4 different continents. We're in Canada, we filmed in Hawaii, we filmed in Kenya, Trinidad, and also the UK. It was very interesting to see the different perspectives, you know, the different realities on this topic. So, like, you know, the conversation happening in Canada, I think if you follow the news, you saw what happened at the Canadian Pavilion this week with the federal government and the, you know, the provincial government. They don't seem to be aligned on this issue. But when you go to the Global South, it's a completely different topic. Like how people view energy transition and climate crisis is completely very different. So we wanted to make sure that this film was able to bring all those realities to the world so we can be better informed when we are, you know, having this conversation. We wanted to make sure that we are elevating the dialogue that we're having on energy transition and climate change.
Thank you so much. Over to Dr. Joseph Onoja to share his thoughts on what and how he believes we can actually confront the climate crisis without leaving anyone behind. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me on this panel. And to put a context to this, and I think I need to give like a Nigerian context so that we understand the mix of the situation we find ourselves. Currently in Nigeria, we are mostly powered by hydro, and just recently we started using gas to be able to power our system. Over 40% of the Nigerian population are poverty poor, and we're talking about 87 million people. Now, we don't even have the energy, not talk about the transition to renewables. And that has really put a lot of pressure on the situation completely. So if you look at, some people already have the energy and are transiting, while others have not even tested it. So from the context of a nation like Nigeria, which is a representation of the countries in the global south, we've not even tested the energy, not talk about transiting to a renewable form of energy. So you can see that climate change is affecting the global south in multiple ways and very negatively. Yeah. Number one, you are not able to get the energy from the not clean energy. You are not even able to get it, and then you are going to transit to the clean energy, which is not even yet available, and yet the climate change or the effects of climate change has not left us unabated. We're still really reeling in that. So it's a complex situation that we really need to look at, and especially with looking at the context of these, the documentary we just watched, without leaving anyone behind. Yeah. Humanity is really at an energy crossroad, and we really need to unpack it and look at it really in the terms, contextualize it, so that we will be able to really not leave anyone behind. Just like the producer, Sylvester, rightly pointed out, different cultures, different areas have different perspectives to this, and we need to bring everybody so that we can all move together in one direction. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Onoja. And you will all agree that we definitely need to address the transition, and as well look at how collectively we can bring everybody on board as we address and tackle the climate crisis together. I have next James, who I believe and who we believe will share his thoughts and views with us on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a very interesting question about bringing everyone behind, and in terms of the different contexts. So I think the issue of energy democracy, like making sure that everybody has energy, is the critical point of departure for the developing nations. I mean, we have yet to develop. This is the engine that drives our development. So we need energy, and we need it at a household level. Obviously, we're talking about, we need it for industry. But there is a fascinating thing about the moment that we're in, which is that we now have this essentially cheaper form of electricity coming along. And it puts me in mind of the situation with phones in Africa. In Africa, we failed to deliver landlines to every house. Most people didn't have access to phones until the technology, the democratizing technology came along of cell phones. Now, you go to Kenya, you go to Tanzania, you go to Nigeria, you go across the continent, everybody has a phone. It's there. And so I think the point is that we absolutely need to do the energy, we need to provide the energy, but we have new tools and they are cheaper. And that is the critical element, right? So when we're trying to do this development, the cheaper tools make it much more viable. But there's still a question of, as was put in the documentary, of delivering electricity to people. It doesn't, we first need to electrify everything, and then we need to build out those grids. So we're looking at the different sorts of infrastructure. But it's cheaper, and I think this is a different argument or a different discussion to where we would have been 10 years ago, right? Now we're looking at, well, maybe we realistically can do this leapfrogging. But there's also the question of those people who benefit from the system at the moment. Employment is critical, right? If we look at the Trinidad and Tobago, where you have 80% of your economy depending on those on fossil fuels. The transition means that you're removing essentially a source of livelihood. And we see that in South Africa as well. We have very high dependence on coal in our energy system. And that's a lot of people who are completely dependent on that and their livelihoods. And so that transition needs to bring those people, look at how do we build those industries, build their livelihoods in the transition. Yeah.
Thank you so much, James. We have Dr.Harrie online, who is ready to share his thoughts with us as we look at addressing the crisis, the energy crisis that we're all confronted with. Dr. Harrie, let's have you.
Is there?
Harrie, you're muted.
Can you please unmute your microphone, Harrie?
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I said I agree with the comments made so far that there is this balance to get a challenge, of getting it right. There's a combination of, I think it's correct that the cost of renewables has come down dramatically. And at the same time, we have the issue of employment. We talk about Trinidad and Tobago, we talk about Kenya, who more recently have gotten into, they've discovered hydrocarbons, oil and gas, and they've built infrastructure and trained people in engineering and finance and various things. And it's very difficult for them to say, oh, well, we're phasing out fossil fuels and we'll figure out something else to do. It's extremely difficult. It's much easier to do that sort of thing in a place where there isn't a resource like fossil fuels. For example, in the film, we go into detail, as Sylvester is talking about in the long version of the film, into the island of Kauai in Hawaii, which within the next 2 or 3 years will be, if not 100%, it'll be 92 or 93% renewables and energy storage. In part, it's because they have good sunshine. They don't do much wind there because they have endangered species of birds, but they use a lot of storage, battery energy storage, pumped storage, and things like that. But the other thing that makes that so possible in Kauai is they do not have any oil and gas resource in the state of Hawaii. And that differentiates it from a place like Trinidad and Tobago or from Kenya, where they do have an infrastructure and they do have a resource. And the thing is, there's still world demand for fossil fuels. So I think what we're going to see is an increasing competition between those different forms of energy and trying to get those down in cost and to decarbonize them. As my friend and colleague who's in the film, and this part wasn't in the bit that you saw today, Ken Mugambi in Nairobi, says, first of all, we have to keep in mind that most African countries are minors, insignificant contributors to climate change, to the emissions. But at the same time, those industries in those countries are, and same as in Trinidad and Tobago, are certainly prepared to do their bit to decarbonize the fossil fuel industries that they would like to see continue in the world. And assuming the demand will continue to be there, because it's not just transportation fuel or heating fuel or cooling fuel, it's also all those other products that are made with petrochemicals.
Okay, thank you, Harry. We appreciate that. You will all agree that the documentary not only set the tone, but the contributions from our panelists have been very, very great. I will still need to go around again in case we still need to take more comments and see what perspectives we need to actually share with the global audience on how to address the climate crisis again without leaving anyone behind. Before I entertain comments and questions from our audience. Thank you.
I think one of the things I want to point out also is the fact that the Global South has now an opportunity and gives us also, there's a challenge but also an opportunity, because when you want to get these renewables, you're talking about a lot of investment. And how can such investment be mobilized? So there are different ways where these investments will be able to be mobilized, and that is why there will be a lot of critical thinking in terms of the governments of these third world nations, the Global South, on how to mobilize these finances. And sometimes these finances can come from innovative thinking, or sometimes it can be internally mobilized resources, especially from the private sector, because they have a lot of role to play. The private sector are huge employers, they're employers of labor, and if they are involved in mobilizing resources in country, it will go a long way to be able to ensure that countries are able to meet these energy needs of their people, mobilize the resources they need. And if you talk about also bilateral relationships or looking for multilateral funding from development agencies and other countries, is a way also that countries in the global south are able to mobilize resources. For instance, in Nigeria, we already have our energy transition plan, we already have our low emission development strategy that we're trying to do. All of these things requires resources for it to be implemented. And where those resources have to come from, there's not somewhere, there are no resources on the ground that you just go and fetch and implement. So you have to drive those resources, and that is where also there will be a lot of thinking around it so that we'll be able to drive these resources to be able to ensure that we implement our transition without leaving anybody behind, even in country as well.
Thank you, Dr. Onoja. You will all agree with him that we equally need to mobilize resources, enormous resources, if we desire to carry everybody along as we collectively tackle the menace of the climate crisis. On to Sylvester. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I'm just speaking from storytelling point of view. I think it's very evident when you walk around COP28 that sometimes it feels like, we're in a bubble here. Everyone agrees with we need to address climate crisis. But I think what I'd like to see more is to have other different parties involved as well, and having other people come to the table and to listen to them and not try to prescribe to them what to do. So as you see in the film, we really try to really bring to light the perspective from the global south, and not have somebody sitting in an office somewhere else and say, here's what you need to do, right? Because the reality is very different on the ground. Like in Trinidad, you saw Christopher George, who was the first guy in his family to buy a home. You can see how his family was so proud of him, right? And I think sometimes those stories can be lost in like graphs and maybe big language that people use. I think it's very important that we actually listen to everyone and we tell our stories, not just within ourselves, people who are involved in this topic, but also people who are not here, people who are not part of this conversation. We also need to make an effort to bring them. I was walking around today and I invited one person that was here today, and we're chatting about this, and I was like, I would like to see maybe, can we talk more also about animal farming, right? We see a lot of protest here, and it looks like there's the same message on that. Can we bring the other people, people who, I think there's a lot of accusation of this COP being the biggest with oil and gas, executives here. But can we also listen to them and hear what they have to say as well, so we can hear that side of the conversation? I think sometimes we tend to stick to what we are comfortable with. And I think in order for us to really move forward without leaving anyone behind, we need to listen to all voices, even the ones that we don't agree with.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sylvester. That has to be the way for us to go as we look at tackling the crisis facing us collectively. On to James.
Thanks. I think the storytelling perspective is an interesting approach, and the reality, of course, is that we have 8 million stories to be told, right? Everybody has some parents who are proud of them, or not, depending on what happens. But I think there is a reality about that talks about the good life, right? What is it that we need to make us fulfilled, and what is sustainable? And those two things can align, but they don't necessarily. And so there is a story about ensuring that humanity, individuals, not humanity as a whole, but the individuals are able to live a good life, they have the resources that they need. That's food, that's the Maslow's hierarchy of needs there, but there is, the connectedness is also critical. But I think there's also a point about this transition process, which probably needs to be made. So that sort of the origin of it was really about talking about how do we address the climate crisis, and that is urgent because obviously things have been moving faster than we necessarily thought, and in terms of the climate, and not so much in terms of our systems. But the transition is already happening, right? It is in process. What we need to do is to make sure that we have the safeguards in place to hold people through the process, because there will be people and there will be whole communities that fall through the cracks in this process, and they need to be seen. They need to be seen up front, and we need to think about how do we address the impacts on those communities. And that is this process of connection.
Yeah. Thank you so much. From our online viewers and audience, we have some questions for the panelists. So the first one goes to Sylvester. Decarbonation is one of the key pathways to 1.5 degree centigrade rise in temperature. But the whole world cannot achieve this at the same pace due to geographical development priorities. How can the global north give a hand-holding to the global south in this process? Sylvester, your thoughts?
I know I could definitely freestyle on that answer, but I think we have the luxury of having a world-leading expert on this who has done 30 years of work. So I think, Harry, if you don't mind, you probably have a better answer than me on this.
Okay, thanks, Sylvester. Happy to pick that up. I think one of the things we've generally seen things like funds transfer, development funds going to the global south. I think increasingly we need to think in terms of technologies and technology transfer to the global south. And there's a willing market for that sort of thing. One of the thoughts that came to mind as we're talking, we need to think renewables is going to be a very important part of this transition, but there are also the other decarbonizing technologies. And one of the things is also the carbon removal. Remember that it's not just what's going into the atmosphere right now, but what has been put there since the Industrial Revolution in Europe and in North America. We need to extract that as well. One of the examples that comes to mind for me, which if we have an opportunity to develop the film further into a series, is an initiative in Kenya in the Rift Valley, where there's a gentleman by the name of James Mwangi, who's a Kenyan, looking at partnering with a Swiss firm to do direct air capture in Kenya. And he sees that as an excellent opportunity in Kenya, where we can use renewable energy to power the extraction of carbon from the atmosphere and put it into the ground in the Rift Valley, where the opportunities underground are first class in the world. Now, this is something that seems very unusual, but it is entrepreneurship, it's technology transfer, and they appear to, it's a company called Climeworks out of Switzerland that seems to be able to have gotten the financing to do this, just as we saw in the film with Dr. David Keith, his organization, Carbon Engineering. So I see opportunities like this that are part of decarbonization and part of how the global north and the global south can work together. It's through technology transfer, through capital to finance these kinds of initiatives. Partly it'll be renewables and energy storage, but partly it'll be also carbon removal. And that's what I see how these things can work together from the global north and global south, I mean.
Yeah, thank you so much, at least for that detailed response to the question. So I go on next to James with the next question. There has been a global call on fossil fuel phase out. What we see today is new fossil fuel investment projects across the world. What can businesses do in making these projects green?
Fascinating question. I mean, at core, we can't make fossil fuels green. That's just the nature of it. It's a little bit like there's an English saying, but putting lipstick on a pig. It's never quite gonna work. There are things we can do to clean up the act somewhat. So, I mean, my colleague from the NCF can talk about the impacts of the fossil fuel industry on the Nigerian Delta. Those sorts of impacts can be reduced by responsible management. But ultimately, the fossil fuel industry's well, fossil fuels themselves, I should say, have an impact that reaches well beyond the industry and the development. And I think it's worth noting that sort of technologies like direct air capture may well have a role going forward. But if we think about the efficiency of energy, the total amount of energy required to provide energy for people and for industries, and then to additionally remove it, is very high. And so for Africa, obviously our priority really needs to be ensuring that the energy goes to the developmental needs, and the removals will come, I think. But the economics for that are not there.
Thank you so much. Dr. Onoja, you are next. Nigeria's energy transition plan, very ambitious, a plan. It requires about $23 billion in investment by 2027. Securing such amount will undoubtedly become a key factor in realizing this plan. How can African countries overcome these financing challenges in the race to zero? Dr. Onoja, please.
All right, so I spoke earlier about, briefly about mobilizing resources, and I was talking about innovative ways of doing that. And one of those innovative ways are green bonds and other funding mechanisms that we can think about. And sometimes, yes, we'll wait for development assistance from the global north, but we as Africans and as countries in the global south, we must look inwards and see what we can do inwards. We have a lot of industries and a lot of private sector players that are coming on board, and we have some profit that can be done, and a lot of them are touting the fact that they want to be involved in these clean energy pursuits, renewable energy stuff, so they can also invest in it. And these are ways where we can harness, where the government can push to harness some of the resources that we need to be able to make this happen. So I personally am going to push for internal mobilization of resources rather than relying on the global north. Because sometimes when you are giving this money, it comes with a lot of encumbrances around it. But you are able to drive internal resources, at least you know that you are able to use that internally to be able to develop yourself and see how we can push that forward. I think that's what I want to add to that question.
Thank you so much. And going that way will make it more sustainable in terms of financing. To Professor Harrie, lastly, we are running far out on our time. We all know that fossil fuel industry rely on carbon capture and storage to reduce emissions from oil and gas operations. And from your experience, from talking to businesses, how accessible, scalable, deployable, and impactful is this technology to reduce emissions? And what other solutions will you recommend? Thank you.
I believe that was directed to me, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and I'll just, an example there again is Trinidad and Tobago. Trinidad and Tobago does not have any, in economist terms, a competitive advantage of doing renewables, solar and wind, although they're increasingly getting into that. Traditionally, they have used natural gas for powering their electricity system, and they're increasingly going to solar and wind. But the petrochemical industry requires, or has been used traditionally, using natural gas to make petrochemicals, everything from paints to plastics. One thing that in the clip in the film wasn't there, that more than 50%, or just under 50% of a Tesla electric car is actually plastic made from petrochemicals. So what they see in their long-term plans in terms of their energy industry, they want to build on what they know how to do, and that is to make petrochemicals. But they want to switch in the long run, and they believe they can switch in the long run from powering their petrochemicals industry by natural gas to powering it by renewables. And so the first step is to do carbon capture and develop hydrogen, blue hydrogen, which is kind of a step towards green hydrogen. Blue hydrogen is produced from fossil fuels with carbon capture, so it's zero emitting, and hydrogen itself as a fuel does not emit any greenhouse gases. In the longer run, that will develop a market for the green hydrogen, which is hydrogen produced from renewables. And they see in a country like Trinidad and Tobago that they have opportunities just where they have the offshore oil and gas development now in the shallow waters offshore Trinidad and Tobago, that those can also accommodate wind turbines, floating wind turbines, from which they can produce green hydrogen in the long run. And what they see the advantage there is that will allow them to continue to do their petrochemicals industry, which provides a lot of jobs and income for the country, and decarbonizes that industry. So it's switching first to some sort of blue hydrogen, which can be used for making petrochemicals, and in the longer run, green hydrogen produced from renewables. So those are the kinds of ways, is that using hydrogen as a fuel rather than oil or diesel or gasoline as a fuel.
Thank you, Harry. At this note, I would like to call on the I will call on Gloria to come around. And we've really done justice to the question. And we have really seen how it's possible for us to mobilize everyone without anyone behind in our collective strive at addressing the crisis of the climate crisis and the energy situations facing the humanity. We appreciate your contributions, Sylvester. Dr. Onoja, thank you for your time. James, we appreciate you. And Professor Harrie, we are grateful for your contributions. They are very, very germane to the issues at stake. On this note, I will hand over to the announcer to actually bring the session to a close. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mahmood. Could we ask if the audience have one or two questions? And then the panelists will respond to that. Are there questions or... Oh, a comment. Okay. So let's take that.
Thank you very much. I thank the panelists for doing justice to the discussions. I come from, my name is Elizabeth J.U. I'm from Nigeria. And I come from the perspective of a civil society person, someone that works, interact with the locals and live in the local communities. We work with them. And so when you talk about energy, we know how important it is. And what Dr. Onoja, his submission was just quite okay, because that's where we are. We don't even have, you are now talking of transition. Because a lot of people at the moment where we talk, at this very moment, a lot of people can't even, livelihoods that depends on energy for survival, a whole lot has happened in the last couple of months. So families are thrown out of businesses, small-scale businesses that, employs the greater percentage of the population, women and children. They are at a crossroad as we speak. So talking about the climate crisis and energy, we are saying, okay, yes, renewable energy is good, is clean, and even from the side of domestic use, but then there is something we need to put in focus. Let's ensure the transition is a kind of phased. Let it be phased, and we want to be co-create together what will work for us better. That's the message we're trying to pass here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the session have come to a close, unfortunately. And you must agree with me that humanity is actually at an energy crossroad. Thank you very much to our panelists and also the moderator. Thank you, Professor Harrie. Thank you, James. Thank you, Dr. Onoja. And thank you, Sylvester. And also to our viewers online, thank you so much for your time, and also those joining us physically. Thank you so much, and do have a wonderful evening.